Guten Tag, meine Damen und Herren. Herzlich willkommen zu dieser Pressekonferenz mit Außenministerin Annalena Baerbock. Frau Ministerin, Sie haben das Wort.
Minister, you have the floor.
Schönen guten Tag auch von meiner Seite. Wir brauchen nicht drum herum zu reden. Noch nie waren
never before have ambitious goals at a climate conference as difficult as these days. But at the same time, it is true, never before a climate conference has been as important as this year. Because the climate crisis is exacerbating existing conflicts and existing crises from the Sahel to Afghanistan, and especially the food crisis that has been given this acute dimension due to the Russian war of aggression. This is why it is important that the world in those 2 weeks comes together here. It is important that we reach results together as the international community. And at the same time, at this conference, we are seeing that despite this very difficult geopolitical challenge, there is one asset, one advantage. You don't have to explain to anyone how dramatic the impacts of the climate crisis are. No one needs to be reminded that this climate crisis will hit you, will hit your own country at home. The climate crisis is globally present in the north, in the south, in the east, in the west. And at the same time, it hits people in very different ways, because people who have contributed least to the climate crisis are hit hardest and suffer most from it. This is an acute global injustice. We see the floods in Pakistan and Australia, droughts in Uganda and Nigeria, forest fires in Europe. But we have other financial means in order to react to these events. At the same time, we are seeing that the impacts are not limited to individual states. Last year alone, more than 30 million people had to leave their homes due to the climate crisis. This is more than the population of Austria, Switzerland, and Hungary combined. That also means that every country has its very own vested interest in containing the impacts of climate change, of the climate crisis, and at the same time that we manage this global challenge, this huge security challenge of this century, we can only solve this crisis together. It is therefore good to see that yesterday in Bali, the G20 has once more expressed its clear commitment to the 1.5-degree goal. And I hope that all G20 states will now take up the mandate given to us by our heads of state or government here to reach a consensus for more global climate ambition and to clearly commit to the 1.5-degree goal. As the European delegation, as the German delegation, we therefore fight hard for this 1.5-degree path. As the German and European delegation, we are clearly committed to fully turning away from fossil fuels. Both in Bali and here at the COP, we have expressed this. At the same time, goals on paper alone are insufficient in order to reduce emissions globally and fast. In Paris and Glasgow, we have agreed on all necessary goals. The Egyptian presidency, therefore, rightly put implementation at the heart of this COP. That is, how can we reach these goals, and not in a faraway future, but in the next years? This is why, as a result of this climate conference, we want to see a long-term ambitious work program with concrete reduction steps that will lead us to the 1.5-degree pathway as a global community. Together with my Belgian colleague, I am holding talks on behalf of the European Union. We are making very clear that for us Europeans, it is essential that this work program reaches a real new level of ambition and that it is about implementation. For far too long, since 2015, also as European states, we have discussed goals for the medium term, goals in 20 or 30 years' time, but we know that CO2 is accumulating in the air and we can't get it out of the air in 20 or 30 years' time. So it is so important that we have this work program to define concrete goals for the coming years. Yearly reduction steps need to be included in that program. So it was important that we as the European Union during this COP made it very clear again that we are continuously reviewing our national contributions, and as Mr. Timmermans had made clear, our own Fit for 55 goal has been increased. At this climate conference, as is the case with all climate conferences, it is not only about concrete texts, but these climate conferences also always lead to something, and that's why they are an asset in itself. From the day they start, they lead to new concrete initiatives being promoted, not only bringing together civil society, but also those who will launch new projects beyond the consensus that we can reach here. And this is especially true for initiatives and partnerships for the global energy transition, because renewable energy sources, that is the answer to phasing out fossil fuels. We therefore have concluded partnerships before this conference and in the wake of this conference, partnerships that will lead countries to the fast lane towards climate neutrality, because many have understood that this is the decisive moment for who will be an industrial leader in the future. And we don't have to wait for the last one to join us. In addition to what we will conclude and what we will agree on here, we can make clear that with others, we move forward with our climate goals. In that spirit, we have concluded a partnership with Kenya last week that will switch the entire electricity sector of Kenya to renewable energy sources by 2030. Kenya thus can become a shining example in Africa that will have appeal far beyond the region. If a country is successful in this, a country that has as many inhabitants as Italy, with increasing growth rates and increasing population, other countries will see this as a role model. This week, we have concluded a multilateral partnership with Indonesia to help this country to move out of its dependency on coal faster. And at climate conferences, it is also about learning from one another. We know how difficult it is to phase out coal. It has been so difficult in Germany because it also has a labor market dimension, a social policy dimension. And our difficulties and also the solution we found is something that others can learn from. So together with other partners, we are supporting Indonesia with $20 billion in public and private funding, helping Indonesia to reach its emissions peaks 7 years earlier than had been planned and can have a CO2-free electricity system by 2050, 10 years earlier than previously planned. And such a JET-P is also something that we have concluded with South Africa. During the climate conference, we have taken additional concrete steps for implementation and have pledged 300 million euros to accelerate the energy transition in South Africa and design it in a socially viable way. On Tuesday, we have presented 2 new funds, one with 550 million euros for hydrogen projects worldwide to accelerate the transformation of the energy sector, moving it away from fossil fuels, because in the past we have lost so much time. The other fund is for forest protection, another very important topic for international climate protection. We have raised our funding for forest protection from 1 to 2 billion euros. We are thus protecting global forests 3 times the surface of Germany. And today I have also announced that we will increase our funding for adaptation to 60 million euros per year. I am making this very clear here. All of this has one clear goal. At the end of this COP, solar and wind must be the winners, and the fossil fuels must be the losers. Only this way will we be able to manage this climate crisis. We can only do this together. In addition to the negotiations and the practical initiatives, the climate conference has also always had a third dimension. It has always been a powerhouse for new ideas. These new ideas are not only sown at COP, they are bearing fruit. Sometimes it takes a little time, but since we need leapfrog innovation in order to be able to reach the 1.5-degree pathway, it is so important to have this creative space to build the future. Here in Sharm El-Sheikh, debates are taking place that will shape the world of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Part of this is the readjustment of global financial flows. These must be redirected in a way that they help to effectively contain the climate crisis. Public funds, and that's part of the truth, will not be sufficient. The effects of the climate crisis are already too severe. We need trillions, and that means we also need private investors. The good thing is, when these investors are here, we should create the conditions to mobilize funds globally and to do that together. This is why we want to reform international financial institutions such as the World Bank. And we want to support this reform process actively. They need to be given a stronger focus on helping states fighting the climate crisis and adapting to it. The end of the fossil age is a necessity. It's on our doorstep. Now, states and the private sector need to act together to clear the way and to accelerate the transition. Because we have lost years already. So this year's motto of the pavilion, you can see right behind me, clearly illustrates our ambition. Ambition in solidarity. We will only be able to master this climate crisis together, and we know that the industrialized nations have a special responsibility to bear in this regard. This is why at this climate conference, together we have presented the Global Shield on Monday, and this Global Shield can be a building block for us to deal with the topic of loss and damage. We have taken a step that we haven't taken in the past, because new steps require courage. You can't be 100% sure that success will come about immediately, but we know that if we do not act in full solidarity and show ambition, we will not be able to contain the climate crisis. And this is why even before this conference, we have made clear that the topic of loss and damage needs to be put on the agenda for this climate conference. We didn't know before the conference, and we still don't know how this process will go forward. But as we don't want to wait, because for us it is a question of justice and not charity to speak about loss and damage, we have made a proposal at this conference for how we can move forward without having to wait for everybody to agree on something. And that is why we created the Global Shield. We hope that this is also an offer that not only will lead to substantial outcomes for how we deal with loss and damage, but also something that others can take as an inspiration. For us, this proposal is part of a mosaic for loss and damage. Two things are important to us in this regard. We need solutions that immediately help the most vulnerable states now. The most vulnerable states are suffering from climate impacts now. And this is why we need a tool that is available now and helps them now, and not only helps them in some years' time. With the dramatic dimension of the climate crisis, time is a luxury we cannot afford. In addition, the question who helps with financial support must be reflected by reality here and now. We're living in this world. We are not living in the world of yesterday. We have a responsibility due to the decision that we have taken yesterday, but we have a responsibility first and foremost for our common future. And this is why it is so important for us that if we create a new tool today for loss and damage, that this tool is not shaped according to the reality of 40 years ago, but that it is designed for the reality of the 40 years to come. It is true, we in Europe and North America, as industrialized nations, have built our prosperity on fossil fuels, so we bear responsibility for the climate-induced damage of the recent past and the present, but the big emitters of today are bearing the responsibility for the climate-induced damage in the future. All states can show now that they are willing to show more ambition and more solidarity. Thank you very much. Thank you. The minister has a follow-up meeting, so we only have 5 minutes for questions and answers. I see one question over here. You can ask in German or English. The minister will answer in German. We have simultaneous interpreting available.
Hello, my question will be in English, I apologize. Ivana Kotosova from CNN. You say the time is now and that we need solutions for loss and damage now, but the G77 group this morning specifically called out Germany as one of the countries that is actively pushing against including a new facility in this year's agreement. So how do you square these two? Why is Germany not supporting political agreement on a new tool now, which is what these countries need and want? Thank you.
Well, this conference is not only about CO2 reduction, it is about geopolitics, and this is what we are dealing with in terms of loss and damage. Together with European partners, Germany at the Petersberg Climate Dialogue in the early summer made it very clear, and I was present there myself, so I know it very well, that we will put loss and damage on the agenda for this event. And back then we spoke with the countries that are most affected. We spoke with them over the following weeks and months about how we can deal with this topic together in a way that it is not only a placebo item on an agenda, not only a tool that at some point will have an effect and everybody can be can pat themselves on the back, but that it is a tool that helps those that are affected now. And this is why we found a group that was willing to move forward. And we said we need a clear definition of what loss and damage is. And we need a definition for who will pay money into that fund and who will receive that money and when. We see a number of financing tools. There are big funds available, but either disbursement takes years or the money does not end up in the places where it is needed most. So I am doing politics to make things better. And when we see that certain structures do not work well and cannot work well because they come from a world of 1992, they can no longer work in 2022. And my ambition is that if we create a new financing instrument for loss and damage, and I made it absolutely clear, we want this financing tool. We want it to be effective today. We want to have it ready for the world of tomorrow. So we as Europeans made a proposal today for how we think that we can best reach that goal. And 2 elements are important for us here: helping those who suffer most from climate damage, and because the damage is so huge, we want to contribute to having different financing means available. So this is why we have proposed a financial mosaic. And I think at this point in time, everybody should take a close look at the text. Sometimes it is helpful to speak about content and not only look at who is standing by whose side, but what is the best solution for our common world. Thank you very much. I'm afraid the minister has to leave for the next meeting. I'm very sorry. We have to keep it brief. Thank you very much for coming, and we will see you tomorrow.